If you have rule of the bureaucrat, if the bureaucracy is in charge, and then what meaning does democracy actually have? If the people cannot vote and have their will be decided by their elected representatives in the form of the president and the Senate and the House, then we don't live in a democracy.
Well, I mean, who elected you, Elon? I mean, did you think about what you were saying as you were saying it? Because you weren't elected. And it seems like Elon Musk has a bigger role in the federal government than Donald Trump does. What you just watched was just a snippet of a joint press conference that was taking place in the Oval Office yesterday with Elon Musk and Donald Trump. You see Trump sitting while Elon Musk is standing and addressing the reporters who were in the room. It was incredible to watch that. But look, there is the substance of what happened yesterday, which I'm going to address, but then there's also the optics and the politics of it. And I want to be honest, and I want to preface the rest of the segment by saying, look, you have to consider that most Americans are not in the weeds of everything that the Trump administration is doing, all the cuts that Elon Musk is engaging in. A lot of people's political beliefs and views, the way that they evaluate an administration is based on optics. And when you compare what you're seeing from the Trump administration in regard to transparency to what we saw with Biden and the fact that he was like nowhere to be seen, he very rarely gave press conferences. Well, it's going to appear like the Trump administration is far more transparent with the American people, right? It's about the optics, okay? Now, is it actual transparency? We're gonna get into that in just a minute. But I think politically, holding that press conference probably worked to Donald Trump's benefit because it gave the appearance of transparency. And so we're gonna get to all of the different things that Elon Musk said in the context of this press conference. But before we do, let me set up the whole point of the press conference to begin with. And we're gonna compare Donald Trump's administration to what Bill Clinton did when it came to cutting down on federal government bureaucracy. So the press conference was meant to tout Trump's latest executive order. There's literally been hundreds of them, so it's kind of hard to keep up. But he did sign a new executive order, which, by the way, was not made public until after this press conference with Elon Musk and Donald Trump had ended. It's called the Workforce Optimization Initiative. So the text of this executive order ordered agency heads to pursue large-scale workforce reductions and gave Musk's team an expanded role in overseeing any subsequent hiring at certain agencies. So look, there is a lot of panic among the left in regard to Trump's efforts in cutting down on federal workers or federal bureaucracy. And I understand that, especially because it's being done in what appears to be a haphazard way by a literal billionaire who's literally the richest person in the world. He's got conflicts of interest. He has access to our private information, social security numbers, bank accounts, things like that. That should make you uneasy. However, the idea or the notion of cutting down on federal government bureaucracy shouldn't make you uneasy. That has happened before, and it happened to a large extent under the Clinton administration. It's just that the Clinton administration was far more methodical about it, and it worked to the benefit of the American people. So let me get to the details on that. So in the 1990s, he wanted to balance the budget, and he did balance the budget. Bill Clinton actually was the last president who managed to get the economy, the US economy, in an area where we have a surplus as opposed to debt, as opposed to a massive deficit. So we had an economic surplus under Clinton, and he had to make some hard decisions, including cutting down on the number of federal employees. Clinton reduced the federal government's workforce by more than 377,000 employees as part of an initiative called the National Partnership for Reinventing Government. Now, again, I just want to reiterate, he did this very differently from what we're seeing from Donald Trump. So as a result of the job cuts and his decision to raise taxes, the US federal budget had a surplus between 1998 and 2001, whereas right now we have a $36.22 trillion debt. Okay, so we're not in good shape right now. But there were notable differences in how Clinton did it. So let's talk about how Clinton did it, how it differs from Donald Trump, so you can kind of understand the differences here. So in March of 1993, just 2 months into his presidency, Clinton announced the creation of the National Performance Review, led by his vice president, Al Gore. The review lasted 6 months and made 384 recommendations to improve the federal bureaucracy. There was no review with Donald Trump and Elon Musk. And you don't have the vice president carrying out a review. You literally have a billionaire who has multiple, businesses in the tech sector making these decisions on his own. And I think what Elon Musk has chosen to focus on says a lot about what the priorities are. And we're going to get to that in a minute. But anyway, the implementation of those policies took a lot longer in the Clinton administration. Clinton ended up signing a bill, by the way. So Congress was also involved in cutting down on the bureaucracy. So he signed a bill in 1994 that offered federal workers a buyout of $25,000. And so what was the end result of that? Well, in a 2013 appearance before the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, former National Performance Review leader, her name was Elaine Carmark, said the agency actually ended up cutting 426,200 jobs by September of the year 2000. But again, what we're seeing from Trump isn't this methodical approach where we're looking at a review. Are these workers important? Are there workers that maybe we can lay off? We don't necessarily need them. There's no review happening. It's just this chaotic, ham-handed approach. And it's concerning because you do need to differentiate between the federal workers who are necessary, who are skilled, who we need in order for our government to function appropriately, and individuals that we might not necessarily need, individuals that we might be able to cut back on, okay? So Musk opened his statements with the usual skewering of government bureaucracy and how it's costing Americans way too much money. Let's take a look at that.
And they've also got to address the deficit. So we've got a $2 trillion deficit. And if we don't do something about this deficit, the country's going bankrupt. I mean, it's really astounding that the interest payments alone on the national debt exceed the Defense Department budget, which is shocking because we spend a lot of money on defense. But if that just keeps going, we're essentially going to bankrupt the country. So what I really want to say is, like, it's not optional for us to reduce the federal expenses. It's essential. It's essential for America to remain solvent as a country, and it's essential for America to have the resources necessary to provide things to its citizens and not simply be servicing vast amounts of debt.
So I'm going to give Elon Musk credit for what he said in this clip. Okay, I'm not going to give him credit for everything he said. So bear with me if you're upset that I'm giving him any credit at all. But the point that he's making about how much it costs to service our debt is absolutely true. So I looked into this just to make sure that I have my facts right. Last year, CNBC actually published this piece in September titled "Interest Payments on the National Debt Top $1 Trillion as Deficit Swells." So they found, this is insane. This is a lot, right? This is a problem. They reported that the government had laid out $1.049 trillion on debt service, up 30% from the same period a year ago, and part of a projected $1.158 trillion in payments for the full year. Subtracting the interest the government earns on its investments, net interest payments have totaled $843 billion. So this is a legitimate concern. And so cutting back on spending is, in my opinion, not a bad goal to have. The question is, where do you cut the spending? I am not interested in having a conversation about cutting things like the social safety net. I'm not interested in doing away with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is literally a cop on Wall Street, big banks, financial institutions, payday lenders. They receive their funding not from American taxpayers, but specifically from the Federal Reserve. They received $700 million, which sounds like a lot of money, except it's not when you consider the fact that the CFPB uses that money to conduct investigations into Wall Street firms, big banks, financial institutions. And since that government agency was founded in 2011, they have returned $21 billion to Americans who had been defrauded by these financial institutions. The idea that doing away with a federal agency that barely costs us anything and returns billions of dollars to Americans is ridiculous to me. Elon Musk in that clip talked about how much money we spend on the Pentagon. Fascinating that cutting the Pentagon budget wasn't priority number one for Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency. They claim they're gonna focus on that soon. But again, the fact that the first thing they cut was USAID or USAID, which accounts for less than 1% of our federal budget, kind of tells you what their priorities really are. Now, let's get to the next clip because it is interesting that Elon Musk claims that they have identified so much waste, tens of billions of dollars in waste. But did they really? So I'm gonna go to the next clip. When we come back, I'll explain a little more about what's really going on and whether what you're hearing from Elon Musk is true.
Are you concerned at all that some of the cuts or that shutting that agency altogether may lead to diseases or other bigger problems starting in other countries that then come to the United States?
Yeah, so that's an interesting example. So that's something where we work closely with the State Department and Secretary Rubio. And we have, for example, turned on funding for Ebola prevention and for HIV prevention.
Left that, you said?
Yes, correct. And we are moving fast, so we will make mistakes, but we'll also fix the mistakes very quickly.
So the method that Elon Musk has used in regard to these federal agencies is similar to how he has managed X after he purchased Twitter. He just fired a bunch of people. Twitter was malfunctioning as a result of that, and he hired additional employees as a result. And look, that's fine for a social media platform, right? That's not the end of the world. But it's not fine when it comes to government agencies that are actually carrying out services, either on behalf of the American people or in the case of USAID, he referenced AIDS prevention or treatment, malaria, stuff like that in countries, African countries, for instance. Okay, if we cut too much, it's okay, we'll reinstate the funding. But when you cut the funding, the harm is already done. Obviously, it takes time to reinstate the funding. It takes time to look at everything you've cut and determine what you want to reinstate. And as you're doing that, real harm is being caused to people in the countries that we had committed to helping on very specific projects. So I'll give you an example. The New York Times had recently reported on some research that was being done by scientists in Africa in regard to AIDS prevention, HIV prevention. And so she was testing out, doing a trial of these like vaginal rings that help to prevent the transmission of HIV and AIDS. She's in the middle of this trial, okay? These women like basically put their lives on the line because you don't know what kind of adverse effects might arise from this. This is a clinical trial, right? But they put their lives on the line to do this because they trust the United States. We had developed a relationship with these communities. Suddenly the funding's pulled and she was told, this researcher was told, don't even tell them what's going on. Just leave them in the dark about it. But she found that to be unethical. So she explained, this program is ending. The funding has been cut. And so I need to let you know what's going on. You need to take out these rings and the clinical trial is over. So damage is already done, guys. When it comes to the federal government freezing funding as it pertains to federal grants, take a look at what's happening to these health clinics in rural West Virginia. We're talking about a red state. We're talking about rural Americans who have lost access to healthcare because these clinics that were relying on federal grants are no longer receiving those grants. Real damage is already being done. I just want to be clear. I actually have no problem doing a real audit, a real review of where tax dollars are being spent and deciding, hey, you know what? This program is wasteful. This is not a good investment of US taxpayer money. Let's cut this program or that program. But to come in and just willy-nilly dismantle an entire federal government agency and say, I don't know, if we made mistakes, maybe we're going to reinstate the money later is insane. The other thing I want to say is he overstated how much government waste the Department of Government Efficiency has found so far. So an analysis done by the Washington Post notes that Elon Musk claims that they found tens of billions of dollars in waste, fraud, and abuse. He suggested that it could be as much as $500 billion when you get down to it. Well, the president's numbers do not come anywhere close to matching the figures posted on the Doge account on X. So they added up the figures posted, taking most of them at face value because, I mean, what else are you going to do? Elon Musk has failed to really provide any documentation or proof or evidence of what he's up to. But the Washington Post added up the numbers that Elon Musk himself cited on X. The numbers add up to about $6 billion a year, though $4 billion comes from a proposed cap on National Institutes of Health research overhead payments to universities, medical centers, and other grant recipients. When we're talking about cutting government waste, we're talking about the fact that the Pentagon has not passed a single audit. 7 audits in a row, the Pentagon has failed. When we're talking about government waste, we're talking about funding wars that other countries are waging against other countries. Like, that's what we're talking about when it comes to government waste. Yes, there were definitely wasteful programs in USAID. I have no problem cutting those programs, especially when there are programs that make it clear that that funding was being used as a slush fund for the CIA to try to topple governments that we don't like. That's not soft power. Okay, I'm not interested in that. But again, most of the focus that we've seen from the Trump administration so far has been on USAID overall in general, cutting back funding for the National Institutes of Health. Like, what are we doing here? All right. So Musk also claims that he's been very transparent. Let's take a look.
The White House says that you will identify and excuse yourself from any conflicts of interest that you may have. Does that mean that you are in effect policing yourself? What are the checks and balances that are in place to ensure that there is accountability and transparency?
Well, we actually are trying to be as transparent as possible. In fact, our actions, we post our actions to the Doge handle on X and to the Doge website. So all of our actions are maximally transparent. In fact, I don't think there's been, I don't know of a case that where an organization has been more transparent than the Doge organization.
But if there is a conflict of interest when it comes to you yourself, for instance, you've received billions of dollars in federal contracts. When it comes to the Pentagon, for instance, which the president I know has directed you to look into.
Yeah.
Are you policing yourself in that? Is there any sort of accountability check and balance in place that would provide any transparency for the American people?
Well, all of our actions are fully public. So if you see anything, you say like, wait a second, hey, Elon, that seems like maybe that's, that there's a conflict there. It's not like people are going to be shy about saying that. They'll say it immediately.
Well, you have received billions of dollars in federal government contracts, and you are now in a position of essentially picking and choosing winners and losers in regard to federal government contracts. Are you going to cut your own access to those federal grants? Just curious about that. Also, in reality, Musk's team is operating in deep secrecy. I know that there's the appearance of transparency, and that's where the politics come in. That's where press conferences like this are actually well played, politically speaking. But there's the optics and then there's the reality. Musk himself is a special government employee, which the White House has said means his financial disclosure filing will not be made public. Also worth mentioning that one of Elon's hackers actually did, in fact, gain reading and editing access to the Treasury Department's payment systems. That was a big story reported by the New York Times today. In a 9-page affidavit, Joseph Gioeli, the third, Deputy Commissioner of Transformation and Modernization at the Treasury Department's Bureau of the Fiscal Service, states that Doge staffer Mark Ellis was mistakenly given read and write permissions over part of the Treasury Department's payment system. Those permissions were promptly corrected, and a subsequent review found that he did not modify the existing Treasury database when he had access, according to the affidavit. But look, everyone was told that no one's getting any editing or writing abilities here or access here. Just read-only access, that's it. Read-only access is bad enough, okay? Because again, the conflict of interests when it comes to Elon Musk is definitely at play here. What do tech executives like more than anything? What do they rely on when it comes to people using their social media platforms? Data. They collect our data. That data is very valuable for their businesses. Not only do they collect that data for their own businesses, they also sell that data to third parties. Data is the most valuable thing that the tech industry wants. And the fact that we have Elon Musk, who no one elected, having this kind of access to our personal information is a problem. You might agree, and I do agree with the notion that we need to cut spending as it pertains to our federal government bureaucracy. But there's a way to do this that is fair to the American people, that is methodical to ensure that we are maintaining important federal government workers so our federal government actually functions appropriately. And I just don't feel that that's what's happening right now. But everyone was told, just this is great. This is great. I mean, look, it seems like we have a federal government, an executive branch that's actually doing something now. Whereas previously with the Biden administration, we barely heard from him. We heard more from Anthony Blinken than we heard from the president of the United States when Biden was in charge. Finally, Musk, along with Trump, keep spreading inaccurate information through their transparency. Let me give you a taste of that.
Mr. Musk, you said on X that an example of the fraud that you have cited was $50 million of condoms was sent to Gaza. But after fact check this, it apparently Gaza in Mozambique, and the program was to protect them against HIV. So can you correct the statements? It wasn't sent to Hamas actually. It was sent to Mozambique, which makes sense why condoms was sent there.
Yeah.
And how can we make sure that all the statements that you said were correct, so we can trust what you say?
Well, first of all, some of the things that I say will be incorrect and should be corrected. So nobody's going to bat 1,000. I mean, we will make mistakes, but we'll act quickly to correct any mistakes. I'm not sure we should be sending $50 million worth of condoms to anywhere, frankly.
Okay, well, look, yes, people make mistakes. But this isn't X. This isn't a social media platform. We're playing with people's lives. And while, again, there might be some good ideas, these ideas are not being executed well. And we're being told that they are when they aren't. Okay, so that's the reality of the situation. Again, the priorities here are genuinely questionable, especially coming from a party that has, in my opinion, pretended like they wanted to do something about the waste in the Pentagon, pretended like they really wanted to take Big Pharma to task. Did they though? Did they want to take Big Pharma to task? Because if they do want to save some money, a really great way to do that, great way to start is to, allow our Medicare system to negotiate pharmaceutical drug prices. I'm not talking about price fixing. I'm simply talking about allowing our Medicare system to negotiate for lower drug prices. That would save American taxpayers quite a bit of money. But that's not a priority, is it? I haven't heard anyone in the Trump administration talk about the fact that pharmaceutical companies are not only price gouging Americans who are not on Medicare, but they're also price gouging American citizens who are paying their taxes into the Medicare system because Medicare can't negotiate for lower drug prices. They just have to accept what the pharmaceutical industry wants to charge for these drugs. How exactly is that supposed to fall under the category of a free market capitalistic system? In a free market, you're supposed to be able to negotiate. Instead, the system is rigged against the American people, against the taxpayers. So we get price gouged when we need our medication, and we get price gouged again with having our taxpayer money essentially stolen by these price gougers through the Medicare system. It's disgusting. So get your priorities straight. Are you serious about cutting government waste or are you not? Because so far, to me, it appears all of the focus is on retaliating against government agencies and government programs that the right wing doesn't like. And when you take all of those programs and put them together, they barely make a dent in our federal budget.
Thanks for watching. If you become a member, you get to watch all this ad-free, except for, of course, this ad. Still, hit the join button below.